Hey, everybody, welcome back to Engaging the Phenomenon. And today we are honored to have on our guest and friend, Kelly Chase. And Kelly is the host of the former UFO Rabbit Hole, co host, writer, and executive producer of the Cosmosis series, documentary series, which hopefully everybody has watched. It'll be linked in the description for people who have not seen it, because the series reflects the depth and kind of bold ideas that are represented by Kelly and of course J. Christopher King, another one of our colleagues. And co-founder of Ontological. So welcome, Kelly.
Oh, thank you so much, James. Pleased to be here. It's been a while since we've gotten to catch up.
It has, with everything going on and the UAP news cycle, which we're going to get into, and life in general. But one of the reasons I have invited you on for a discussion this week is for, I believe, a talk that you gave at the Contact in the Desert, which you ended up doing an episode on, which was, I want to say masterfully crafted, but I don't want people to take that the wrong way, as in, trade craft or anything, which is what very much this kind of themes we're going to be getting into in this discussion. So I thought the episode on Cosmosis podcast, which I'm going to link in the description, was called UFO Narrative Wars: Weaponized Belief in the Age of Disclosure. And this is something I've talked about in the background with Hermes, or the Hermetic Penetrator, as disclosure wars in in that there's this narrative. I mean, it's been going on for decades, but I'll let you get more into it. So where did this presentation and episode and come from? How did this end up coming to fruition?
Oh gosh, in some ways it's been a very long time in the making. I'd only worked on it for the last few months, but when I started the UFO rabbit hole, I really was coming to this as a complete noob. Like I started in 2021 and I was someone for whom like UFOs weren't even on my radar. It wasn't something I thought about until I had like a crazy anomalous experience that kind of opened all of that up for me and changed my life. And the UFO rabbit hole was really a way for me to kind of trace my own journey and kind of figure out what was going on. And when I started the UFO rabbit hole, I really kind of had stars in my eyes. I felt like the disclosure movement was something that I felt was extraordinarily important, and I was very inspired by it. And I really just felt like I wanted to do anything that and everything that I could to support what was happening. And so, like, that was really why I came into this field. And over the last 4 years, as I've really done my best to become a student, not just of the phenomenon itself, but of the history of ufology and where this, and I'm still in many ways standing on the shoulders of giants and relying on, friends like you and J. Christopher King and Daniel Elizondo and people who've been doing this for like a lot longer than I have. Um, to kind of help me get my bearings. But over the last few years, between, the learning that I've done, and also I think with ufology, it becomes really important because we're so insular in some ways to look to resources outside of the field. So I've also been doing a lot of reading about the history of the intelligence community, intelligence tradecraft, even things like mind control and that sort of thing, to try to understand all of this more. And while also kind of getting deeper, more and more deeply immersed in the field myself. And it just got to the point where I felt like the way that I had originally seen disclosure and the movement and all of this really changed a lot over the last few years. And that was disorienting and it was discouraging at times, and could be really demoralizing. And I really was looking for frameworks. Like, how do I make sense of what it is that I'm looking at and how do I not get lost in all of the noise? And so that episode was really kind of me putting all of that together, like all the pieces that I had put together over the last few years of things that helped me navigate the space better. It doesn't mean that I necessarily have it all figured out or that I'm right about everything. I put it out there and welcome people to challenge it, but these were ideas that were useful and helpful for me.
And I think one thing, at least at the very least, that was super important about the way that you presented the material was in a framework that was nuanced. And I think even for, let's say, people in the intelligence community, applied humility, which is often something lacking, is because it's either, I mean, there's like an impulse for people to make it black or white, where it's good guys and bad guys, and in that way, if you're coming at it from that point, you're automatically canceling out half of your audience, in the sense where people are going to shut down intellectually, and they're going to react emotionally when you say these are the good guys and these are the bad guys, because there's, for better or worse, intellectual camps within ufology, and the UFO disclosure effort, I'll say, UAP transparency effort, however you'd like to call it. And, it's automatically, well, this person's doing this and they're a bad guy. And, again, it's, if you look at it that way, you're going to be running in circles, and even if you have genuine criticisms or points to make, again, it's not, it's going to fall on deaf ears because of the emotional reaction. So what, I mean, again, how did you come about trying to communicate that in the presentation?
Well, I'm really glad that came across because that was my goal. I mean, I really think at the end of the day, it's super not useful to get too into this like good guys, bad guys framework because it forces you to make judgments and like ontological commitments in places where you should probably be moving a little more slowly and asking more questions. For one, I think it's not a clear way of seeing things because ultimately this field and everything around it, we're talking about non-human intelligence, but like we're talking about human beings and human beings are messy and they're complicated. And whatever little sliver of information I have about somebody is only just that little sliver. I don't know. I don't have the rest of the picture. I don't have clearances. I don't have insider information. And I think that, I mean, I'm sure you've experienced this as well. Like, if you have any kind of a platform or your name is out there publicly in any way, people make up these like elaborate conspiracies about you. These like it's like this elaborate fan fiction that's getting written. And sometimes you read what people are saying and you're just like, this could not be more off base, because they just have this much information. And so like I want to bring that same humility and that same nuance to other people and not ever go too far and not ever push it into this place where I'm making a judgment when I don't have enough information to make a judgment. And also I think that that's a lot of the way that this narrative control works is that it gets us all caught up worried about like moralizing and making moral judgments and campaigning against people and all of this, and like it's just supposed to put us on a rat wheel and just make us go 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 go, like it's not helpful. So that's one thing, but I also just don't think I just don't think that like that's just not the way I want to operate in the world. And also in general, I as much as I get kind of disgusted or demoralized by what's going on in kind of a macro way when I look at all of it, the more that I learn about what's actually going on and how the intelligence community actually functions, I make the case in the episode, and I really do feel this way, that I think that the intelligence community is the most elaborate hostage situation on the planet. Like, I think that people get into this work wanting to do good and wanting to do the right thing and also wanting to like learn more about something, and a lot of times it means that their information zones are more sullied, they're increasingly isolated, they end up having to be a part of things that maybe they wouldn't have signed up for if they had really had all the information beforehand. And when I say that, whenever I've said, whether it's on another podcast or on my own podcast, that the intelligence community are hostages, the amount of people that I see like going through my LinkedIn, right? Like suddenly it's a bunch of people from Huntsville checking in on me. Suddenly it's a bunch of people from, Bell Labs. Suddenly, and I see who's starting to follow me. And I think, long story short, I get weird encouragement from the sidelines from people who I are pretty clearly within the intelligence community being like, thank you for saying that. And so I really do think that there's a ton of nuance to the situation, and that if we get into like villainizing people, that not only have we lost the plot, but we've kind of like played into the narrative control that is supposed to be distracting us anyways. So I really try not to.
Yeah, absolutely. And, getting into that aspect of the narrative control, which was communicated excellently in the episode, uh, you know, can you give people an idea watching and listening how does it operate?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's really complex. The first thing, and the thing that I think it took me the longest time to wrap my head around, is just the scale of it and the scope of it. Um, I think would have thought when I started this, and even up until relatively recently, I would have thought, you know what, there's no way that they could really be executing something on this scale. Like, surely there's like bad actors, but like, could it really be that like a large amount of what we're seeing with the disclosure narrative, like that could be in some way artificial or curated, or like essentially some kind of theater. And what I've come to see is that, like, I think that's actually absolutely possible. A lot of these programs, and this is something that I learned from our mutual friend, Daniel Elizondo. A lot of these programs, these black budget programs, they are spending 6 to 7 times the amount that they spend on the programs themselves on security. And security looks like counterintelligence, smoke screens, like it looks like distraction. And they're spending, like, when you think about how much money we would have to spend on something like a crash retrieval program, like, like Immaculate Constellation or whatever you want to like assume that that might look like. And then you think that would be spending 6 to 7 times that amount just on security. Like, I think that that was something that was tough to come to terms with, but it really changes the game when you realize that that's where it's at. That said, I don't think that everyone involved is on somebody's payroll at all. I think that what the intelligence community does really brilliantly is that it weaponizes narratives and it weaponizes beliefs, and it turns communities in on itself by kind of elevating heroes and villains. I use the example of like pro wrestling, of kayfabe, this idea where kind of the audience suspends their disbelief that what they're looking at is some kind of a staged production. And I think that that's sort of where the UFO community is right now. Is like we're very wrapped up into kayfabe. Like, we're very, everybody wants to, cheer the heroes, and everybody wants to boo Sean Kirkpatrick. But then, like, what's going on in the background is far more complex than all of that. And actually, like, how far removed is Sean Kirkpatrick really from the people that were raising up as heroes? And so it's it's really complex. I can dive into all different places, but I mean, I think that just understanding that they're very, very invested in controlling the narrative around UFOs, partly because there is an 80-year cover up there, and also because UFOs, because it's so tied to our deep beliefs and it can be used to change people's perspective and what they think about the world and what they think about themselves, that the UFO phenomenon has also been used to cover up a bunch of other things. So they have a lot of vested interest in what this very insular community is doing. And I think that the messaging is far more manipulated and controlled than certainly than I would have believed when I began all of this.
Yeah, and there's also the idea that people in the intelligence community and people in the intelligence community getting closer to what people would consider core secrets uh, are, they're lied to themselves, right? And, kind of if you want to call it a leak or what have you, something that came out that is a perfect example of that is the email chain with Kit Green, Combe, Kelleher, and on the alien autopsy, where that came out with the Wilson Davis documents, and that through the Edgar Mitchell archives after he passed, was that Kit Green was brought into the Pentagon to look at photos that he was told was from an alien autopsy. And in this email chain with the NIDS group and uh, you know uh, Bigelow Aerospace, he's saying, I think they're lying to me, right? So I mean, he's saying it right then. He's outraged by it. So there's that aspect of it as well as is that just because somebody is in the intelligence community doesn't mean that they're well informed or told the truth on this and they're withholding it from everybody. They're being led down these rabbit holes and set loose as well.
Oh,
So
absolutely. I mean, people who are, if you don't, they're very serious about this need to know thing. And like, if your position doesn't involve your direct, like, very serious need to know, like, you need to know, or the United States is in danger, then like you don't need to know. And that means that a lot of the people who are, even running counterintelligence and smoke screens and stuff around these programs, they don't know. And and I'm sure that it's because, like, why would you tell them? People can, it just creates like another layer of risk. And so we're kind of in this, like, I've always loved what Linda Moulton Howe said in Mirage Men, that it's a fractured hall of mirrors with a quicksand floor. And I think that's a perfect description.
I mean, for better or worse, people have different perspectives on the Mirage Men, and I remember first, when the book first came out before the documentary came out, I found it in the library, and I was like, "What's this?" Right? And at first, if you're a UFO researcher, it's almost like upsetting, right? This is additional layer of ontological shift that you have to go through, and because sometimes when people read it, they're reading it as, oh, because there's counterintelligence hiding programs using UFOs, they automatically assume that what that means is UFOs are not real. And that's not the case, and that's not completely what is trying to be communicated there. But the documentary Mirage Man you can watch on YouTube for free with ads. I think you can still watch it. I probably watched it 20 times at least. It's a classic. I think everybody should watch it. And again, there's I think actually what you have provided with the episode that you did on Cosmosis is definitely a few extra steps beyond that. I applaud you in that. I think it's probably one of the best works I've seen on the topic of this again because it's you're stepping on eggshells when you're talking about this, right? Because you're automatically becoming an enemy of the state within ufology when you try to talk about this. And I mean, I can tell everybody here listening from experience. I know what Kelly's talking about is absolutely real from experience. Uh, and there's another sentiment I think is important that you communicated in the discussion, which people need to realize. And if you've ever studied psychological warfare or tradecraft or even um, stagecraft, right? Like or magicians and whatever, um, sleight of hand. One of the most important tools to use against the other person is their ego. So if you believe that you cannot be tricked, that it's somehow not, it's everybody else that's being fooled, not you, you become very easy to control. And so I I wonder if you can expand upon the idea that what we watch the documentaries and we read these things and we think not us, right? It's not us that's being fooled because we're reading about it. It's the other people. It's everybody else. So what that dynamic, I wonder if we can expand upon.
Yeah, I think that's so important. I think, we give a lot of lip service in the UFO community to psyops, but usually when people are pointing those fingers, very often it's just like funny how, like, the people you don't like and you don't get along with are always the people who are getting psyoped, but not you. Like, it
Right.
could never be you, you know? And I think that for me, it's really important to recognize that, like, no one's ever going to be able to psyop you better than you psyop yourself. Like, at a certain point, that, like, ego thing that you're talking about. I mean, I don't want to downplay the fact that these people, many of them are very, very good at their jobs. But also the human psyche is, if you start studying intelligence tradecraft, like, the human psyche is ridiculously easy to hack. Like, it's very easy, especially when people don't know what to look for. It's very easy to get somebody to like you. It's very easy to get somebody to trust you. It's very easy to get somebody to align their beliefs with certain other beliefs in such a way that attacks on those beliefs start to feel like attacks on their identity, and then they have to defend that. And I say that being fully transparent about the fact that like I have fallen victim to literally all of those things. And I don't think that even now I'm immune to them. Like I think people, you have to realize that like this stuff just works, and that one of the only ways really to protect yourself is to not is to distrust your own thoughts first. Like you have to start with you. Like you have to know you have to be clear. You have to know what you know, and be clear on whether or not you know that thing because you've actually gained the information and experience to know that, or whether or not this is just like another belief that you're piling on the pile because like it kind of feels like it goes with these other ones and you haven't really looked into it. Um, because there's a lot that goes on, and like and a lot of it you think you'd see it, right? But I don't think that we do normally, like it, because sometimes it seems counterintuitive, like reading about intelligence tradecraft and stuff. Like one of the ways that um like if you want somebody to trust you, you tell them a secret. Like if you want someone to like you ask them for a favor. Like these things that like seem counterintuitive really work, and they become this kind of like backdoor way in, and there's a million backdoors into our trust and into our belief. And I think that it's really difficult to kind of stay grounded sometimes and to stay clear, and but you can't, the only way to like possibly protect yourself from it is you have to be aware that like you can be a target, that you are perfectly capable of being lied to, of being wrong, of like reading a situation incorrectly, and being willing to accept that. And I hope that like in the community, something that we should all get better at is like just being willing to be wrong in public, like just because you thought something before doesn't mean that like now you're tied to those beliefs for the rest of your life. Um, there's enough emotionality tied up in all of this. Like it's not fun to come to a lot of these realizations. Like it's sad and it's hurtful, especially if you're somebody who's invested a lot of time and energy into some of these ideas and people, and then suddenly you start to kind of lose your trust or become disillusioned. Like that's hard enough to overcome. Like overcoming your own ego, though, I think ends up being the harder part. Admitting you were wrong, or even considering that you could be wrong, allowing your beliefs to be up for review and interrogation is not an easy thing to do. And it's certainly not something that's like valued or modeled much in our current culture. But I think it's super important, especially in this field.
Right. And, you know, a lot of that gets to, and this is just coming from my perspective, is a very, very kind of like a Zen approach, right? Like in being comfortable knowing that there's certain things you just can't or are not going to know, right?
Right.
And a bit of like Vipassana self-analysis of tracing back where the actually belief stems from. Why do you believe it? And can you actually know that as a fact? Not based on somebody's word or even what amounts to what looks like evidence, but gnosis, right? Like a
Mm.
knowing, a personal knowledge through direct experience. Uh, but again, this thing about the I can say like lying or even disinformation. I mean, it's funny because there's individuals that are have been investigating like some of the NIDS group, right? And I don't want to name names like, oh, this person and this person, but I mean, one of the people, I mean, they're actually telling you, right? Like Dr. Eric Davis, uh, Joe Merge at the beginning of his Wilson Davis memo mega thread, which is like insane, a great piece of work, definitely helped by Juliana Marinkovic. Uh, one of the great quotes that Joe put there was from, I believe, Dr. Eric Davis, and it says, "You're going to be lied to because that's the rule." Right? And I mean, because that, they'll some people in the intelligence community will talk about certain things. And this is difficult because it's like, okay, how do you parse out what they're talking about, which is they genuinely believe, but there's a line where they have to protect national security and they have to protect the program, right? So, trying to navigate where that is you have to acknowledge that you don't know, right? And there could be one sense where they're trying to tell you something that is what is something they believe through their research, and there's another where there's a line where they have to lie to protect a program at the same time. Um, and let's just talk about, like, say, the UFO legacy program, right? Like, why you don't think that psychological operations is part of that legacy program, right? It's not just crash retrievals, right? It's also the protection thereof, which is as long going, probably actually longer than the retrieval stuff. So again, what you said, that these people are very good at what they do. There's a legacy of deception, but again, it's not necessarily ill-intended deception. It's their job. So I think one of the most important things here, and what I'm trying to facilitate here, is that we need to have this discussion as a community without pointing fingers, without making good guys and bad guys and falling into that like the heel trap or what have you, and playing into part of the counterintelligence. And I mean, in my opinion, I think that, and what people might say, this is whatever, but I think every podcast should have you on, or at least discuss this topic. And I don't see why they wouldn't. I think that this conversation should be at the forefront of our discussion as researchers, right? And especially people with communication platforms, right? Because if you have a platform, you're in some way, either directly or indirectly, going to be tapped for your reach, right? To infiltrate your fan base or whatever it is, right? And I'm, again, not even saying that maliciously, but if there are people that's their job, that they're going to do, they're going to do it, right? And maybe from their perspective with the best of intentions. And again, even within the that structure, there's people, those individuals themselves have different beliefs and agendas. So, some of them are more rogue and it's obvious, and then some of them are playing by the rules, and that's kind of the game, right? Um, but I did want you to get a little bit more into this idea of like the heroes and the villains, because I think that's an important aspect, because you have an individual who's maybe put on a pedestal, and we've seen people rise and fall over the years, maybe by design or self-sabotage or whatever it is. But you come to this cult of personality thing, and people identify with an individual as being somebody that's a champion for truth. And where it's a very human thing. So again, there's nothing shameful or wrong about it, or believing somebody has the best of intentions and what they're doing is for the good, right? So yeah, I just like if you can elaborate on that idea of like the villains and the heroes and how that mechanism works.
Yeah, no, and I agree with you that I don't think it's if anything, I think that this plays on some of our better instincts, right? Like I think that the willingness to believe in a hero is a willingness to believe that that somebody in the face of insurmountable odds and at great personal risk would be willing to do the right thing for humanity because just because it's the right thing to do, right? And I think that believing in that I think that that points to an intrinsic goodness within people, right? That you believe that someone would do that because there's something inside of you that would do that, right? And so I don't think that it's anything to be ashamed of if you get caught up in it. Um, I think that, and honestly, some of these heroes may actually really be trying to do the right thing and they get taken down, right? Like there's a bunch of different ways that this could happen. But I think that this framing of kind of like the hero versus the heel, it puts us in this place that controls the conversation that we're actually having. Like you have kind of one side of the conversation that's being um, really defined and shaped by the people who are the heroes, and we feel like we can trust them and we want to listen to them. But then like that sort of but then you don't want to get out ahead of them either, right? So like you kind of end up like they end up sort of defining one side of the conversation through trust. And then the other side of the conversation is being kind of defined by these people who we would define more as villains or as heels, these people who we don't like and we don't trust. And then those people, the extent to which like grown adults who appear to be otherwise gainfully employed seem to be willing to get onto the internet every single day and get right back into fighting with one another about the same crap is notable, right? Like it's notable. Like and I do think some of those people are paid, but I also think that it's like a human nature type thing. Like there is a community and identity that gets built up around being like a disclosure advocate or around being like a debunker. And then all of the information that you're taking in and all of the data that you're taking in through that lens. And when you've decided that like your side is the good guys and the other side is the bad guys, that turns into like a trap for everyone involved because you're much more willing to overlook information or data that doesn't kind of conform to the side that you identify with. And you're much more willing to dismiss kind of anything that comes from the other side. I think this is something that's actually used a lot and that we see often. I think to use an example that I hope isn't too controversial in 2025, I think that there are and have been a lot of issues with the 2017 New York Times article of just like things that like didn't quite seem right or like data points that weren't quite correct and that we never really got good answers on. But because the main people like championing that narrative were people like Stephen Greenstreet, who people really don't like, I think that a lot of the community, myself included, was sort of willing to like just not ask any further questions and just be like, oh, you're just stirring stuff up because you're the bad guy and I don't need to listen to you. And like, and so I think that there's kind of like a trap that exists there. And I think it also ends up just like focusing the conversation. I think it's really difficult and something I try to be conscious of, and it's not great for business, is that like we're constantly getting like this drip of more information, right? And everybody's hungry for it. Like we all want the new interview, the latest whistleblower, like whatever the new documents, like whatever we can get our hands on, where we want more information. But then when we kind of hop on the like daily or weekly UFO news cycle and like immediately form an opinion and start creating content around stories that are like 24 hours old or a week old or something like that without any like further looking into it, we're kind of just doing the IC's job for them. Like it's so all we're doing is just like repeating what we're being told, but like we're providing that microphone and that amplification. And honestly, what's most being amplified is the kind of the conflicts, the heroes and the villains, who's mad at who, like what's Kirkpatrick doing? What's Lou Elizondo doing? What's, you know what I mean? And kind of, and it pulls us into this story, but it's a story now that we're a part of, and that our identity and our community and who our friends are and all of that is really tied up in that. So it makes it even harder to kind of see things clearly. And I think like the biggest issue then is that if we're more invested in personalities and with tribes and with that sort of thing than we are in the data and the information itself, then what happens when that hero gets taken down? What happens when suddenly we feel like, oh, actually, maybe that's somebody I can't trust? Like, what happens when that person is like wildly discredited, whether we agree with what they were discredited over or not? Like, it ends up rug pulling the entire community and all of the good information and everything else that could have come out of that ends up getting tanked because it was all kind of like resting on the hopes of this like great hero. And so, um, it's a really complex, the way it plays out is very complex, but the human part of it and the thing that hooks us is very simple. And I think sometimes it's hard to admit how simple we can be.
Yeah, for sure. And I mean, just like there's so many examples of these different things. I remember like years ago the Roswell slides event, and uh, Edgar Mitchell was kind of involved in that, and I think Paola Harris and Richard Dolan, and then it turns out it's be like some kind of fake or what have you. The Atacama mummy, right? Even this Boogosphere thing, like all these, it's like these things, and now you have these people tied to it, and it turns out like, oh, maybe it's questionable or whatever, and it's like this other failure or distraction or I'm trying to think of the exact word. Listen, like a continual letdown. It's like, oh, it's like another, I don't want to say failure, but it's another discrediting event that they occur time after time again. It's like an endless loop. But I wanted to shift gears a bit into the discussion. Actually, before we go there, you mentioned it a bit in what you just said, but this idea of like how do you recognize that you're in this narrative war? Like how do you see what's the checklist like? Okay, I'm in the disclosure game. Like how do I orient myself and see like I don't want to say it like, oh, how do you recognize that you've fallen for it, right? I I mean that sounds like unincentivizing for people to do the self-analysis, but like, how can we be empowered and be mature and in our orientation in this intelligence game?
And I love this question. Um, I think one thing is to like notice, are you taking things personally that are not personal? Like, or that don't have anything to do with you? Like, if you're having like a really strong emotional reaction to these things, I think that is not something to be ashamed of. Like really caring about. I think there's all kinds of reasons, especially for experiencers, to have a lot of like emotions about all of this and to be very invested in it. But I think like if you're constantly noticing that like that that you're feeling personally attacked or like responding as though you're being personally attacked, um, when uh, when someone presents an idea that doesn't match what you think is going on, um, or doesn't conform to kind of like your little tribe or whatever it is that if you feel like you have a side, I think that that's something to pay attention to. Something that I really think is a community I would love to see us focus more on is like, it's almost like a common argument. Like the thing that I hear most from people, because there are people, including people that I used to consider friends and that I sincerely hope I will be able to consider friends again at some point. But like I've lost friendships just from saying things like, I don't think Lou Elizondo's story totally makes sense. Like have questions about, images that he's shown and like like that he's shown publicly and that sort of thing. Like just completely like people have really melted down and been gotten very, very angry at me. And like the thing that I hear most from people isn't even necessarily like a rebuttal of what I'm saying. It's that like, but don't you see how this is gonna just feed the skeptics and the debunkers? And it's like, I don't, that no, like sure maybe, but that's not how I'm looking at this. Like I'm not willing to overlook things within our own community because I'm like worried about I'm not because I'm not worried about sticking it to the debunkers or the skeptics. Like I actually don't really care what they think. You know what I mean? Like I don't, and I don't think that we should be willing to overlook things because we're more concerned about like our guy winning and someone else looking stupid than we are about the truth. And I think that that's something that happens all the time. I would say somebody I know who I'm really inspired by their ability to juggle all of this, and I try to be more like, is actually Daniel Elizondo. Like,
Yeah.
I think that he is so good at like mapping the nitty gritty of kind of like the ugliest parts of all of this. And at no point does he take any of it personally. He doesn't bear any hatred towards anyone. He's curious. He's endlessly curious, is what that man is. And like, I think that that's what makes him such a good researcher, is that he approaches everything with curiosity, and wanting to understand it and never with judgment. It's never about like, well, this person sucks or like this person. It's not about that. It's about understanding what's going on and finding humor and absurdity in the very human elements of it. And so I try to be more like that, and some days I'm better at it than others.
Yeah, and again, he's one of the co-authors of Loose Threads, which we'll link here in the description, which is a perfect example of his research along with the Hermetic Penetrator or Hermes. And get speaking of Daniel Elizondo, no relation to Lou Elizondo for people. I
Right.
always get that question.
Me too.
Uh, you know, he had discussed something uh, called the secret onion. So can you break that down for us? What is the secret onion?
Yeah. So the secret onion, I feel I think it's such a useful idea, and it did come to me through Daniel. Um, and okay, so when we're talking about secrecy and like institutionalized secrecy, like the type that would be around, UAP programs. Um, we often talk about stovepiping, and I think people are familiar with that idea where like, each different where different parts of the program are being handled within different um groups, and that don't necessarily know the whole project that they're working on, and they're not in communication with other people who are working on other parts of it. And so basically the information to understand everything about what's going on is separated. It makes it much harder for any one person to get a real picture about what's happening. But the secret onion kind of takes that a step further, where instead of like kind of these vertical stovepipes, we're talking more about like an onion skin, like the way that an onion has these kind of like layers and layers over each other. And that what you see on the outside of the secret onion is basically what we're looking at. Like for most of us who don't have clearances and who like don't have connections with anyone in particular who's giving them information, like all you ever see is just the outside of the onion. But the way that the onion is set up is that like each layer is meant to hide the existence of the layer beneath it. And so we look at like the disclosure narrative and like, what we think of as the field. And we think of those people and we think that that's like all that there is because that's what we see and those are the names that we know. But the truth is hidden much more deeply than that. And each layer that you go deeper, you are further kind of into you're in some ways it's presented as like you get further into the onion and you get more access, like let's say you're like an academic who does some work that ends up like, oh, maybe this is going to be really useful to the people who are working in this program. They might invite you in a little deeper, and maybe suddenly you're getting invited to some secret meetings and that sort of thing where they're discussing the phenomenon. But you're not actually, it may look like access, but even the layer that you're in is then set up to hide the existence of the layers further underneath. So in some ways, what looks like gaining access to secrecy is actually containment. Like it's actually you they're extracting things from you, whether it's your research and knowledge, your experience, your whatever it is that can benefit them, your platform, right? Like whatever can benefit them, and you think that you're getting this access in exchange for those things. But what you're really doing is you're getting pulled like deeper and deeper into the hall of mirrors, basically. Like you're more surrounded by secrets and you're less able to talk to other people about it. And so the secret onion is uh, I think it's something that's used all the time. I think it's not just the UFO community. I think this is also how a lot of, like, they didn't come up with this idea, but it's something that's used throughout the intelligence community. I think it's used in mystery schools and, across the board. So I think it's a really useful idea. But in particular, we know that this was the structure that was used by Hal Puthoff and John Alexander and others with the Advanced Theoretical Physics Working Group back in like the 1980s and around that time period. A lot of people, like whose names people would still know, were working on a program that was kind of in some ways a precursor, a very early version of OSAP. That they in particular used the secret onion structure to hide what was going on with that program. And we know that because of some memos that have been unearthed from Hal Puthoff to other members of the group talking about that specifically.
Yeah, and oh man, there's so many directions to go from here. You know, and in part of that, so you made a really interesting post on X, right? I believe it was today, right? Was it today?
I think so. Yeah, I did a big
Yeah,
one today,
yeah.
if that's what you're talking about. Yeah.
Yeah, people keep asking why I'm still talking about disclosure when I said I was done. It's a fair question. I've been asking myself the same thing. I love this term that you used. I've started to think of it as disclosure samsara. And uh, so, it's, I mean, I'm going to actually link this in the description because I think everybody needs to read it. It's a little lengthy, um, but can you describe your thought process with this post and tweet or however you want to call it, and and yeah, just explain the tweet a little and your thoughts on it and that whole thing. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. So a lot of this really dates back to February when I ended the UFO rabbit hole. And I did like the last episode of that. And I explained as best as I could at the time, why I was walking away from the disclosure movement, like which really came down to the fact that I had come to a place where I began to really believe that a lot of it was really manufactured, that I think a lot of it's kind of theater, and that I think that the real purpose of what's been going on since 2017 really has more to do with um, technology transfer and congressional oversight and things for these programs. Like, I think that there are people who, um, want to be able to get back some of this technology that's been siloed away within defense, contractors, and that's been something that's been going on for a few decades. That like there's like they've wanted to give it to the United States, and the United States has wanted to take it from them, but because like these things don't exist and there was no oversight, and like the technology transfer becomes a real problem. And so I think that this was something that needed to happen in front of Congress, and like Congress needed to be involved, but that I won't say everyone, but I would say I think probably at this point, my personal belief is that the vast majority of people involved in disclosure actually aren't interested in transparency. They're interested in like kind of these other background logistical things that like you could argue are actually good things and should happen, but it's not like what we've been told about disclosure, right? That it's not necessarily about transparency or telling the American people the truth. And so I said I was walking away from it. And now here I am doing this episode on UFO Narrative Wars and like talking about it more. And I mean, I really did I meant it when I said it. I intended to walk away. I've found that it has been tough for me personally. Like going through kind of the dismantling and the disillusionment process of coming to a different understanding of what the disclosure movement is has been hard on me. Like I'll admit that. And in some ways I feel like I've lost the spark a little bit. And I wanted to get back to doing this work in a way that felt fun and meaningful. Because like really, if you have a UFO job and you're not having fun, like you really like quit. You know what I mean? Like otherwise, like what's the point? And so I didn't want to be in this like headspace anymore. But at the same time, I had to realize that like I'd love to pack up my toys and go home, but that's not how this works actually. Like I have a platform. I'm talking about this topic, and when I don't say what I think, one way or another, my voice and my platform end up getting used for me by other people, directly or indirectly. My kind of complicity or, tacit approval gets transferred to people that I am not complicit with and that I don't endorse. And so like I have to be honest about it. And I also have to be honest with myself about the fact that like as much as I hate it, like I'm not walking away. I haven't done it. I have not successfully done it. I'm still following every story. I'm still paying attention. And so like I just have to get real with myself about the fact that like so did I like do the ufology equivalent of like throwing a tantrum and quitting Twitter and then coming back 2 weeks later? Yeah, absolutely I did. And I can I can own that. And I do own that. But more than anything, I own it and I'm going to continue to speak up when I feel like it's appropriate, when I feel like it's helpful, and I'm willing to take on the risks associated with that. I think that me being silent, if I'm being really honest, like I've been having these thoughts for a long time and I was quiet because I didn't want to deal with the backlash and because every time I stuck a pinky toe out and said anything, the backlash was insane and I lost friends and like it felt like it wasn't worth it. And now that I think some of the things that I said are a little bit more acceptable, like I'm not proud of the fact that like I'm saying it now and that I didn't say it before because now it feels a little easier. That's not why I said it now, but like I wish I had said it before. And so there's that aspect of it. But more than anything, like I have this real, I started this because of like an insane anomalous experience and like a contact with some kind of non-human intelligence that brought me to this field. And I've had so many strange and bizarre and miraculous things happen since then. And my questions and my inquiry and my curiosity is about that. And yet somehow this like spectacle of disclosure always pulls me back in, and I recognize that that's kind of what it's intended to do and that it's supposed to sort of wear us out and exhaust us and distract us and all of the things that it does so effectively. And so, I can't help getting sucked back into it sometimes, but my intention moving forward as much as possible is to return to like what I love about this and what I care about and why I was here in the first place, and to not let myself get so swept away in kind of the day to day of whatever the narrative is.
Yeah, and it's really, I don't want to say it's impossible, but it's difficult to engage with the phenomenon, right? And somehow not in one way or another get tangled up in the disclosure conversation, especially if you're somewhere in the public, right? Uh, I mean, it's the same thing with like Greg Cameron always say he's just trying to focus on the consciousness stuff now, but somehow he always gets roped back in to the disclosure conversation. And even we had mentioned before we started recording Stephen Greer, right? Stephen Greer never intended to get wrapped up in disclosure. He started his whole thing for CE5, the CSETI, the Center for the Study of Extraterrestrial Intelligence, was where Stephen Greer started. And somehow he got pulled into Project Starlight and the Disclosure Project, and most definitely because of all that became a targeted individual. Uh, so it, even on the experience, maybe especially on the experiencer end of thing, you can end up getting tangled up in the intelligence game or disclosure thing. And I mean, the most important thing is just to be aware that it exists, right? So what do you think people could do? You know, I mentioned orientation, but what about, I mean, even through your own process, right? What can individuals do about course correction? Like, okay, how can I find my way back to my passion of why I'm doing this? Because it could be often that, we started this investigation or our journey because of this experience or whatever for whatever reason it is, and that's like your original spark or passion of why you're really involved in this, and then somehow you get roped into this other stuff without even realizing it's occurring until you're like, holy shit, how did I get here and why do I hate UFOs now? Right, like, so
Yeah.
right, so like what can people do to rekindle the spark of their original passion for investigating the unknown or the phenomenon?
I love this question. I something that there aren't a lot of things that I like really, really believe. As you know, we're talking about having to be humble and having humility and stuff like, but there aren't a ton of things that I really, really believe. But something that I really, really believe is that our curiosity is sacred and that there is a connection that we find to whatever you want to call it, the anomalous, the numinous, the divine, whatever that is, that part of us that is multidimensional and more than human, our connection to that, and I think our most direct connection to it comes through our curiosity. And I think that in some ways, like what's so seductive about the disclosure narrative is that it like weaponizes that curiosity, that it feels like you're like just around the corner from a revelation. And so like you're locked in, right? Until you just get exhausted and like drop off. Some of us lack the self-preservation instinct to drop off.
Yeah.
But I think that but I think that if you can find the things that like that light you up in the way that whatever it was that brought you into this lights you up, like that, and find it outside of things that are being fed to us by the intelligence community. Like find, like right now, just as an example, like I'm really like lit up and excited about the idea of that plasma could potentially be intelligent, right? Like, and I'm getting back to some research that I was doing a couple of years ago into aquatic humanoids. And like, is that a little pulpy? And like, especially the aquatic humanoids. Like, yeah, absolutely. But like, but I want to get to a place where like I'm excited by what I'm doing and where I'm having fun with it and where it's giving me more positive things into my life, which to me looks like more interesting thoughts to think and more fun books to read and just more avenues to go down. Like, I really think that that is the path. And it looks different for everyone. But I think that for most people who are brought into this field, we're brought in by a fundamental question. We're brought in by a curiosity, and that gets kind of like turned against us and used against us. But like if you can find your way back to that spark, to being excited, not just like, oh, this again, like I think that that's the way forward.
Right. And yeah, I think with that is like, this should the journey of UFO research, but I mean that even uh, you know, the, being a truth seeker or what have you is, it should be invigorating, it should be empowering. You shouldn't be, if you find yourself getting run down or stressed out, I mean, think about what's doing that, right? Like if you go on, I mean, maybe people shouldn't go on UFO Twitter or X too much, but if you go on there and you find yourself becoming distressed and worn down, I mean, that's probably not the way to go, right? I mean, you should be following your passion in the sense where it's fun, right? It's interesting. It is, um, again, invigorating in the sense where it's self-propelling, rather than um, wearing you down,
Yeah.
right? I mean, maybe that's a good indicator of like you're following your actual passion or not. Or rather than following what the narrative is and following what you think was originally your passion, but now you're off track without even realizing because you're following the story, right? The tailored crafted story that is there, but nonetheless there is a real thing there that I believe we should all pursue in our own way. So with that, what are some words of advice you would give to fellow seekers?
Mm. Um, I would say like the best thing is to number one, just like not being afraid to be wrong. I really feel like that's something that has changed dramatically in our culture in the past 10 to 20 years is all of a sudden maybe it's access to social media and just kind of the anonymity of that and you can just sort of be certain, or maybe it's the all the access to all the information, or it's the way the news media is manipulated. I don't know, but like you see this thing and you see it in every aspect of life where like I'll be talking to somebody or like see somebody online or whatever, and they're talking so passionately about something that's in the news. Like, let's say like gas prices go up, and now all of a sudden everybody is an expert on like how gas prices are set and like what affects that, and and who's responsible, right? Like who, and within 24 hours, because that's the thing that they're told to be mad about that day. And like half the time, if you like really ask somebody, like, well, how do you know that? They don't know that. It's just like a set of opinions that they've been given and that like we haven't and that haven't really been analyzed. And I think that if you can get to a place, not just with UFOs, but literally with everything, that's something you said a little bit earlier, I believe, but like where you need to know like do I actually know what I know on like a gnosis experiential, like I know this thing, or like is there just sort of an accumulation of evidence, or is this just an opinion that you've kind of absorbed through osmosis? And like none of those things are necessarily any better or worse than any other. Like we are not capable of having like granular like soul level like gnosis type knowledge about everything. In fact, we probably can only really do that by like a set number of things in our life that we can really know on that level, and we rely upon other human beings and their knowledge and their expertise to help guide us. And that's not a terrible system overall. You know what I mean? Like it allows us to do all kinds of really cool things as humans that we wouldn't be able to do otherwise. So it's really more about removing that judgment and just being able to recognize what kind of category of knowledge that is for you. Like, is this something I like know, or is this something that I think is probably true? And being able to depersonalize it in that way, where it's not about if I don't know this, then I'm not smart enough, or I'm not good enough, or I'm not whatever. It's that it's just being real about what you know and what you don't know, and maintaining a curiosity about the things that you don't know. Like being willing to be surprised and being willing to be wrong. And that like when somebody says something that seems to like totally undercut everything you believe, and you get that kind of like in the heart, and you're just like, that's nobody likes that feeling. You know what I mean? Like maybe somebody does. I certainly don't. But being able to like recognize what that feels like in your body, and then to learn a different kind of response, where you go like, ooh, like I didn't like that. Like, why didn't I like that? And then leaning in with curiosity, being like, well, why do you say that? Or where did you hear that from? Or like, how can I know the thing that you say that you know? And then going and looking, and you don't have to agree with that person or not. It's just about maintaining humility in yourself and being open to other people, being willing for your ideas to change. And I think understanding that like you're not going to get there with the answers. Like that can be kind of liberating. You're not going to know everything, and you're ultimately still going to be wrong about stuff. And I think that being able to accept that, if you're able to really do that and just be real with yourself, it becomes a lot harder for other people to manipulate you, or for you to be unwittingly used in any kind of a game or a narrative. You still probably will be, right? But like you can you can minimize it.
Yeah, and I think it's easy for people to take things personally without, I mean, without even realizing it sometimes, right? It's just a knee-jerk reaction. So we have to ask ourselves, like, wait, whoa, whoa, whoa. Like, why am I even reacting this way to something, again, like you said, is that has nothing to do with me. I have no vested interest in it other than I identify with particular ideas. How can that be used against me? Or not even used against me, but how can I be utilized because of that very human reaction, right? And so you're not going to win every time, right? In the sense of like be at peace with that, right? I mean, I always say the whole thing, whether it's about spirituality or whether it's about UFOs or disclosure, look at it as a practice, right? As a continual gradual process that you can constantly refine over time with effort. I mean, if you can apply the principles of inquiry, right? There's a practice called self-inquiry. Um, and that again, that's an entire practice that you can embody and even apply it to UFOs or disclosure or to anything in your life where you're going deep on it. And I mean, you can contemplate in the inquiry process something for a day, for weeks, for months, for years, right? And I think if you take that level of depth, it's going to really help your character shine, right? And I think it's the development process that everybody will benefit through your interaction from. Um, so I want to thank you again for coming on, Kelly. Is there anything that you want to say as final words or something that we should be looking forward to with Cosmosis?
No, I really am grateful that you had me on the show and gave me a chance to talk about it. And I hope that people will think about it and will check out the episode. And like I said, I even say in the episode, like you don't have to believe me or agree with me. And I usually encourage people to not, right? Like I'm not saying don't listen to listen to these people, listen to me. I've got it figured out because I don't. I'm just sharing what I know, and if it's useful, great. And if it's not, fine. And I'm sure that I'll change my mind a million more times. And I think that we all need to be open and willing to do that. And then I guess the final thing I'll say is that if anyone hasn't seen Cosmosis, UFOs in a New Reality, the docuseries I worked on with J. Christopher King and James Ian Doley is featured in that as well. Um, Check it out. You can find all the links to all the different platforms at cosmosis.media.
Yeah, and I have to say, maybe I am a little bit biased, but some of my favorite parts in that docuseries was Daniel Elizondo.
No, he's the best.
He just freaking nailed it. I love that guy. I always say he's the new Richard Dolan of this generation. He hates when I say that, but absolutely excellent researcher. I hope to have him on again soon. And again, with this episode, with this discussion, I'm really I think that this element of the conversation needs to be discussed just as much as we talk about UFO secrecy and crash retrievals. This needs to be on the forefront of at all times as a part of the entire discussion, right? Because it's a way of orienting yourself, of evaluating information. And I mean, with our own sophistication as researchers, the narrative control mechanism is only going to also adapt, and we have to
Right.
be aware of that. So it's a constant gradual thing. And again, I mean, for me, part of why I created this channel is engaging the phenomenon, right? So you don't always want to get caught up in the news cycles. And I mean, it's this news cycle thing is more of a recent phenomenon because it wasn't around before, in decades ago as much. I mean, like you'd get a tidbit from a UFO conference if you went to it, or if you got a newsletter from it, or if somebody wrote a book, there'd be, there it wasn't this waterfall of information cascading everybody's minds, right? So that itself is an evolution of this UFO narrative war. And we're gonna have to continue to adapt with that. And we have to keep this conversation on the forefront. And again, I hope that all the other usual podcasts in the space have you on to discuss this as well. And, I'd love to have you back on to discuss other elements for sure. We didn't get to cover, half of what I wanted to cover in this discussion as it usually goes. So I think that this is something that should constantly be discussed in the very refined and sophisticated manner that you delivered in your presentation. So I want to applaud you for putting your neck out, number one. I mean, uh, if I can say so, I think it's admirable and you have a lot of cojones for doing so. So, you know, props for that street cred and UFO street cred, if such a
Thanks.
thing exists. Uh, and I hope to hear you talk more about it. And I hope that others enter the conversation, as in video games, especially as Super Smash Brothers says a new challenger has arrived. I hope to see more people become part of this element of the conversation because it needs to happen. So thank you so much. Thank you for all your work on Cosmosis and everything else, and keeping people empowered and inspired, and for all the work you do. So thank you so much, Kelly.
Oh, thank you, James. It was a pleasure chatting with you as always.
All right, take care. We'll see you guys next time.